Oh my word, switching computers today. Having a pile of interesting things happen to me that I'm going to eventually talk about here. Okay, first, let me apologize. I didn't show up yesterday when I said I was. I rescheduled. I had a situation yesterday where my oxygen levels tanked, and I still don't know exactly what happened, why, or any of that, but they tanked. I don't know. I just know it was incredibly frustrating to have dealt with on my side up in the bed. So there's that. And I don't know that that's going to happen today either. So, and I'm having some symptoms that are telling me that it may be happening. So I'm going to do this thing. Better to be earlier in the morning for me. I can get my stuff done. Today, that stuff is unpack everything from our giant trip and water my plants. So that's doable with this. If you don't know me, I am Suzanne Titkemeyer. I, for almost 10 years, wrote a column for Pathos called No Longer Quivering. It was all about evangelical fundamentalist quiverful, a movement that says that women exist to breed, women exist to have babies and to raise those babies and no other reason. I was part of that movement for about 15, 16 years. And I've been out about that long. So it's pretty interesting looking back. I'm 61, looking back over the course of 30 plus years since I did join. And so it was longer. I was longer in there. So more like 18 or 19 years, I'd say. I'd have to go back and check the years exactly. Long time. Didn't buy everything they were selling. I'm currently writing a book about it. I'd started out with a serious book, but I kept getting bogged down on telling my tale of how I came to Quiverful. It's a sad tale. So I switched to looking at the comedic aspects of it. And that's going well because the characters are bizarre. And speaking of bizarre characters, today we're going to be looking at a book written by one of those bizarre characters from another church, a guy named Vaughn Ohlman. Vaughn Ohlman is not a pastor. He runs a little teeny tiny ministry. For a long time, he was a writer at Prospero News. He left there. I don't know what happened. He started one ministry and then he renamed it and went to Let Them Marry. The comedy of that was something like 6 years ago. Shank Uger from The Young Turks, which was on the RT channel, and whatever the RT channel was before it was the RT channel. So it was on television for quite a while, and now it's live on YouTube. It's kind of a liberal show. I'm kind of annoyed with Shank. I think he's kind of ridiculous, and he has said and done some things that lead me to believe that he needs to be gotten by the YouTube movement too. So I'm not his biggest fan. Anyway, I was a fan of this. Vaughn Ohlman would Let Them Marry. Him and some other guy was writing for him, came up with this meme about girls being like apples and how the father has to protect their virginity by protecting the apple tree and making sure nobody molests it and picks the apples and various things, and that the sweetest apples are on the top. I got the biggest laugh out of that meme, and I had to take it apart for NLQ, No Longer Quivering, where I wrote for Pathos, because Vaughn had accidentally strayed into a territory I actually had a lot of knowledge about. He strayed into the territory of growing apples. When we moved to Virginia, and we lived in Virginia 29 years, when we bought our house, one of the first things I did was plant 2 apple trees in the backyard. One here, one there. Close enough for them to pollinate, cross-pollinate, but not so close that they would run into each other at all. I actually researched it. The length that you're supposed to plant them apart is how I planted them. In those 30 years, After 3 years to put down a taproot, we started getting apples. And I mean, we got apples. We got copious amounts of apples all the time. So I knew that the meme they were using on Let Them Marry was ridiculous. Why was it ridiculous? Because he's making all these observations about protecting the apples. Well, not so much. Apples don't really get protected. Birds eat them, chew on them, insects get them. When you pick them from the tree, they're filthy dirty. You have to run them through like a little bit of a bleach bath to get rid of everything before you can start cutting them up and canning them, make it apple jelly, whatever. So they're not as protected and perfect as what he's saying. And these big apple farms bring in huge crops of Haitians, people from Central and South America, to pick the apple crops very quickly and cheaply. So I laugh at him saying that it's protected too, because you got all those immigrant hands touching those apples, and Vaughn is very anti-immigrant too. So Vaughn runs this little tiny ministry, and around the same time he was attempting to run a very big ministry, and that stopped after No Longer Quivering and the Young Turks got a hold of him. He actually has on his website now that we had internet rumors about him, when all we were doing was repeating the things that Vaughn said, repeating his own words, like I've always done with these people. I repeat their own words. And if they're saying awful words, it's not me putting awful words in their mouth. It's just they're saying awful words. They're saying awful ideas. So the Young Turks took him apart about the apples and made fun of him for his courtship only model, because it's pretty awful. Vaughn tried to spin it into courtship camps where he would charge people $2,000 a head to get together to match their teenage boys with their teenage girls, because Vaughn believes that if you have breasts, you are old enough to be married. Now, for some of us that developed breasts and started our periods when we were 11, that would make us marriage material and Vaughn Ohlman's thing. So he tried to have this big camp. I reported on it. It got picked up. What I wrote got picked up by newspapers as far away as Africa. You had Africans laughing over what this guy was doing. So there was that. There are very few things that I'm super proud of with NLQ, but I'm proud that I got his marriage camp shut down and that nobody paid him thousands of dollars to match underage kids together. Interestingly enough, when he married off his oldest son, his son was over 18. The girl he married him to was over 18. He married his son Joshua to a girl named Laura Camp, and he used his courtship model, which does not use any kind of marriage license or anything like that. If they decide to get married, you have a marriage, a courtship model sort of thing where they get together and they say, hey, we are going to marry these kids together. We are going to marry them, and we are going to have this awesome thing going on with these kids. So I know that sounds super crazy, but that seems to be what he does. Well, his whole book, which is what I wanted to talk about today. What are you doing? What are you doing? The entire book is about the courtship model without the marriage license. They get together and say, hey, we're married, and they have their little tiny ritual, and then they go off to have lovely relations. I have to come up with ways to say this that YouTube does not spank me for, because I have the tendency, I'm old, I have no filter after my stroke, so I have a tendency to blurt these words out, particularly on a day like today where my oxygen levels are pretty low and the filter is even less in place. I'm going to be blurting words out and yelling and everything else. So the thing I want to point out first is that the novel has is written in script form. It's not written in novel form. It's all talky, talky, talky. That's a little weird. I expect some exposition. I expect some explanations of where they're at. I'm expecting stuff like rolls eyes or sighs and frustrations. It's frustration and gazes out across the lovely greenery of the park. The majority of the action in the entire novel takes place in a park. There's so much hanging around in a park discussing lovely fun times in the sack that it starts to almost seem like a creepy sexual predator kind of scenario. It's like how the police didn't get called to that situation. I would love to know, because it's creepy and weird and wrong. I'm sorry, I'm having a side effect from my Lyrica where I start drooling when I talk, and that's not very much fun. So there's that. The other interesting part that makes me laugh is the fact that of the names that he picked for the characters. There's an Andrew Adamson, which means something like strong and brave son of Adam. There's a Sakal Davidson, which means like messenger, son of David. The girls get it even worse. There's a girl whose name is literally Maiden Terrafil, which means maiden earth girl. There's another girl who they seriously shame for being, their words, not mine, loose. I would use the S word to describe this, but I don't want to get spanked by YouTube. So they seriously, loose girl, shame her repeatedly. And her last name, actually her name, let me pull it up and I'll take a look, because it's been so long since I read this book in its entirety that some of the little, Jessie Dumont, that is the girl's name, Jessie Dumont. And if you translate that, Jessie Dumont means girl of the earth, I think it was. It was something like that. So right away you're looking at these crazy names and thinking, what the heck is going on here? Why? So it starts out, foolish Andrew Adamson is in the park. He's playing with his cell phone. He's got his iPhone out and he's playing Candy Crush or something else. I don't know. And Sakal Davidson comes up to him and starts asking him, what are you doing? Which is where the title of the book comes from. And Andrew tells him he's trying to find a date for Friday night. Sakal starts questioning, why do you want a date? Andrew says what everybody says. Well, I want to have some fun until daddy takes my iPhone away, I guess. And Sakal starts questioning more and more. They're sitting there in the park. All this questioning is going on. I would have been looking over those two and going, particularly after seeing Sakal approach, and think that's kind of weird. So it comes out that he wants to have fun, but Sakal says, not on my watch, buddy. So he starts explaining to him over the course of many chapters, always in the park, that dating is not the way to do it. It's courtship. You have to have courtship, and courtship means that you're going to marry. You shouldn't be dating, according to Sakal, if you have no intention of marriage. If you have no intention of marriage, then you need to leave the opposite sex alone, because they might be like a bomb. Andrew Adamson describes his dates with Jessie Dumont and tries to say that she pretty much almost date raped him, and he was hanging on to his virtue for his entire life. I don't know too many 17, 18, 19-year-old men that would make that claim if somebody jumped them. Hormones kick in. And you probably do that thing that you're not trying to do. So for him to say he resisted her because he knew it was wrong is pretty far-fetched, just like the rest of it. It's pretty obvious as you read the book that Vaughn has no idea, none, how normal people conduct their lives. He just doesn't. You can just read this from some of the conversations. Jesse Dumond shows up, and Sakal starts giving her a hard time. Sakal is described as vaguely Middle Eastern, so I'm guessing he's supposed to be an Arab that is converted from Muslim to Christianity and is now super over the top about it, would be my guess. I think it's probably modeled after either a fantasy character or somebody that he might actually know in real life. And there are those Christian Muslims out there. I have met a couple. My husband has a correspondence with one who I think is a pretty ridiculous dude, but my husband loves to talk to him. Even though I'm like, go ahead and cut that off. Stop doing that. He's just irksome. Like, no, I'm interested in hearing. I'm sorry, I got to take drugs. I'm starting to feel weird. So Sakal straight up shames Jessie Dumond and starts asking her about why she's trying to have random fun times with guys. She talks about how because it feels good. It feels good. If it feels good, do it. There used to be a song, I think, that was the main chorus, but he starts shaming her for wanting to have physical pleasure. Well, I'm not a big fan of people running about and just randomly having that kind of relations when they're young, only because a lot of times it involves coercion, and it's not necessarily always the person's choice. Plus, your brain is not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s, so it's probably a good idea to wait until you're at least 18 to engage in that stuff. But I understand most people don't. Most people lose their virginity at a very early age. And so he totally shames Jessie after asking her all these questions about why she's doing that. And it comes out that she's doing it to keep a boyfriend, because if you don't have a boyfriend, a fiance, or a husband, you are yet less than worthless in the eyes of the world. Such utter and complete codswallop I have rarely run across. That is got to be one of the most ridiculous things I've heard. It's a meme that gets floated around quite a bit in Fundytown. It may have been true some years back. I remember being a teenager, my father saying these things to me, and I was just laughing at him going, Dad, wake up, join the 20th century. Well, now join the 21st century. So Vaughn is pushing these ideas that were in vogue maybe in the 1950s, that some Christian fundamentalists are still hanging on to doggedly, like they're actually a thing. The whole book goes on. He meets this maiden Terafil, and there's all this talk between maiden, her father, and various people, and then courtship happens after they convince Andrew that courtship needs to happen. And there's a lot of talk about those lovely, fun time marital relations. A lot. And Vaughn starts to lovingly describe the breasticles of young women being firm and upright. And he spends so much time talking about this teenage marital fun time that you start to wonder about his own fantasy life and braids, because somebody who's talking about that stuff is obviously thinking about it quite a bit. And one of the things that I've always found extremely creepy about Quiverful, about fundamentalism, about certain brands of evangelicalism is the emphasis on those fun marital sex things. I swear nobody thinks about sex more than religious people. They seem to be obsessed with it. Whereas most of us out here living in the world who aren't living in Fundy Town don't have that much thought and control. That it doesn't control us that same way. Some of us can take it or leave it. Some of us have high drives and we deal with it. We find ways to deal with it, whether that be through marriage or friendships or whatever. Kind of reminds me in some ways, I just finished reading a book. One of the things I've been doing this last year is I've been rereading all of the books that, well, not all of them, but a lot of the books that were popular back in decades past. I recently read oh shoot, I'm having a brain fart here. I read stuff like The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, which was a good book. I read Peyton Place, which was a trashy book. I read the one where they made a movie out of it, starring Sharon Tate and Patty Duke and the other lady, Valley of the Dolls. I reread that. I read that for the first time, I'll say, and after having seen the movie endless times. I read this week Looking for Mr. Goodbar, which, if you haven't read it or seen the movie, it does tie into what Vaughn's talking about here, because it's all about this school teacher who teaches in New York City in her 20s, coming up on 30, who has a high drive. And she deals with her high drive by picking up random men every now and then to sleep with, doing one-night stands. I read through that, and all of the guilt and condemnation that was piled on this woman for doing this in 1974, because this is based on a real case, something that did happen. And I was like, why are they shaming this woman? This woman has a high drive. The male in her life cannot satisfy that. So she's dealing with it. And who is to say that her morality is wrong or the way she's dealing with it is wrong? I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to judge her on any of that, because I don't know what it's like to walk in those shoes. But the thing that's really common in all those books is the level of shaming of women is insane for having needs, for having sexual desires, for having needs. Women are endlessly shamed in these books, these movies, for having needs and wants and desires. Normal needs, wants, and desires that patriarchy and Vaughn Ohlman says can only be satisfied in the godly bounds of marriage. So the rest of the book was leading up to marriage, including this very hard to read chapter about how Andrew and Maiden had gotten married and had taken a honeymoon and had not left the hotel room to eat or see anything, just to have endless sex with each other. Again, I feel like I need to go immerse myself in a boiling vat of Purell after reading that, and scrub with the kind of wire brushes I used to use when I did stained glass, scrub myself screaming with lye, because I've read what is clearly the fantasy life of this middle-aged man. So the book is more illustrative of his hangups. You can read the book for free online if you choose to do so. I would say don't read it if you are easily nauseated, because there are a lot of really horrible parts. You will also realize that Vaughn is no writer. His book is just, it's like written by a child in some ways. The language is simplistic. It's written like a script. It's very boring, except for the random nubile, fertile young breasticles, those references, and you're just going, trying not to throw up. So Vaughn is no writer. I've read some of his other books. He wrote one about a boy that woke up, teenage boy that woke up with a vagina. He wrote one about a teenage girl that woke up with a penis. not realizing that that had been done by better authors earlier. And all kinds of wacky hijinks ensued involving sex, of course, because that's what Vaughn is all about. He just likes to wrap it in Bible and pretend that it's all godly. Sex is a fact of life. It's just a desire. It's something that people need. I'm not going to say all people need because I can think of certain fundamentalist female cultural enforcers whose names I'm not going to say that advise you to use 5 minutes and lube to keep your husband happy and never think about your own happiness, which I think is personally kind of counterproductive. It should be a joyous coming together of a husband and a wife if it happens in marriage. So there it is. There we got that. We got Vaughn. So now I need to move on and talk a little bit about the other day I talked about the Duggars. I hate talking about the Duggars. Hey, Mandy, and I'm about to talk about why I hate talking about the Duggars. I hate talking about the Duggars. I'm looking for more drugs. I know I sound like a dope head here, but I really am suffering today again. I hate talking about the Duggars. Why? Because the Duggars. Oh, Tamara, do you remember when I wrote about that for NLQ? Because it was crazy. I was reading that book and just like in horrified shock. Every time I read a book written by a quiverful enforcer, I'm just blown away by how wrong they get things, particularly things like dialogue, how people in the world act, everybody else's thought processes. It's just pretty weird. And the farther and farther away I get from my quiverful years, the weirder it seems. So anyway, long story short, whenever I talked about the Duggars on NLQ, I would get Duggar defenders piling on to tell me how wrong I was every single time, even through the Josh Duggar assorted scandals. I'm just going to call it that, assorted scandals. If I explained how we got to the assorted scandals because of the purity, modesty culture, which is the same thing I'm talking about with Vaughn Ohlman here today, if I explained how that kind of thinking leads to that kind of scandal, I would have people screeching out that I was defending Josh, which I was definitely not. I was just trying to explain how we got from point A to point B to point Q. So couldn't win. People got pissed off anytime he talked about the Duggars. So I would try my damnedest not to, unless I had something that I could verify. If it was something that I could verify, it wasn't just a random rumor being shot out into the air, I would write about it. And in would come the defenders. YouTube has been wonderful because the Duggar defenders have mostly left me alone. The other day, I talked about Anna Duggar buying a piece of property for $1 mere days before Josh was arrested. And I talked about how the timing was suspicious. Everything about it was suspicious and squishy, leading me to believe that they all knew about it. This was some kind of attempt to have an asset that the government could not touch for Anna, which is probably a smart move, actually, at this point. So that's where I went with it. Sure enough, the Duggar defenders, for the first time since I left NLQ, marched out. Now, the night that I did this, it was like today. I didn't have a lot of oxygen levels in my body. My oxygen was low. Oh, by the way, this is the only way you can get medicine in Costa Rica is in blister packs. It's a pain in the butt. I'd rather have a bottle. But the Duggar defenders, and they always take it in the craziest places, always. So I had Duggar defenders trotting out here, whose comments I squashed because they were all pretty nasty. I only left one of them up. They went on the YouTubes, not on the YouTubes, they went on my Twitter and spam me. They spam me instant messages. They can't do that on my Facebook because my Facebook is locked down and it's just friends. I don't accept any kind of messages from some random person that I don't know. for reasons. Anyway, I had to laugh, but the only one I left up was a lady who accused me of being vain about my hair, which I have laughed so hard about. The other night when I came on to do the Duggar thing, it had been a long day. My oxygen levels were around 92%, which is way too low for, it's incompatible with human life. If you get down to 90, they like you to go to the ER and get supplemental oxygen. That will tell you something about that. So I was hovering right on the brink of having to do that. And I'm talking about the Duggars who I hadn't thought about in forever. And I just run through this humongous thunderstorm here. During rainy season, which we're here right now in Costa Rica, it rains every afternoon. I'm sitting here now watching the clouds pile up, and I know we're going to get a rainy afternoon. My kitchen and living room smell stale and yuck because of the moisture, which means I'm going to have to go in there and run the AC as hard as I'm running it in here to get it to smell nice again. And it's just a reality of rainy season here. So I ran through this thunderstorm. We're getting our car worked on. Wet head to toe. I came in, somebody PM'd me and said, hey, did you see this? I was like, no, I got to talk about it. So I came on, I was all wet. My hair was clipped up. I took it down and started fanning it out to dry it. And in Duggar Defender land, that translates to, you're vain about your hair and you're fishing for compliments. I want to address that. I just want to address that. That is the craziest thing of all times. My hair is my hair. I don't try to grow it out. I live in a place where there are no decent hairdressers. I live in Tamarindo, which is the back of beyond here. It's a desert half the year. It's a steamy jungle the other half of the year. It is just easier for me to trim it randomly every now and then and throw it up on my head in a ponytail or a bun. I've seriously thought about shaving my head because of the heat here, particularly when I get days like today and this whole week where I've had oxygen levels in the toilet and I can't walk. So Duggar Defenders can stop PMing me about my vanity, about my hair and how much I touch it. Look, if it itches, you're going to see me doing like this a whole lot, and I'm going to be moving it around and moving it off my neck and things. It just is what it is. And if you're bothered by that, guess what? You can just click off. And I'm fine with that. I don't intend to talk about the Duggars unless something weird and squishy happens, like a dollar property bought. The reason that I even mentioned that one is because this is the same BS that the Duggars pulled right before Josh got sued last time. They sold Josh and Anna's properties to a shell corporation managed by, I think it was Travis Story. Don't quote me on that. They bought properties for anywhere from $1 to $10 and held them in this trust. Now, if that is not some phony baloney attempts to hide income and to hide assets, I don't know what is. Because you get compliments doesn't mean you're vain. Exactly. And like I said, my hair is my hair. It's just my hair. It grows. You know, I've gone through chemotherapy 2 or 3 times for various and sundry things, including my asthma. I know that probably sounds crazy, but if your asthma gets to a certain level and there's nothing they can do to treat it, they'll put you on methotrexate, I think is the name of the drug, which used to be a chemotherapy agent. They'll put you on high-dose methotrexate. And when they did that, I lost all my body hair. I mean, all of it. And I lost about half my eyebrows, and I lost about half the hair on my head. I almost shaved my head. I cut my hair off to like a 1/4 inch on sides and then spikes on top because I could not deal with the handfuls of hair. If I ever go on chemo again, I'll be shaving my head. I know somebody here in Costa Rica, a very lovely young lady named Stephanie, who's a singer. I would tell you Stephanie's last name, but quite frankly, she got married recently and I don't remember. I know everybody here by first names mostly. And say, hey, Jim, what about Danny? Danny who? Danny O or Danny T? Danny V. So it's like that. But Stephanie is a beautiful young lady. She's probably in her mid 30s, I'd think. She's got a beautiful face and figure. She's done some modeling and stuff. But here in Costa Rica, she keeps her head shaved. She keeps herself shaved. I'm not talking about a quarter inch. I'm talking an eighth inch or less, or just shiny head. And guess what? It looks lovely on her. I would have never have thought that. I would have thought, well, that's got to be the weirdest thing I've seen anybody get. Well, do. Well, let me tell you something. Living in Costa Rica the last 4 years has changed me in some important ways. I don't look at externals and judge people anymore. I don't look at people and say, that person has no hair. They must really suck. Or looking at somebody with holes or ragged clothes, because here that's kind of a reality. I'm getting ready to have to go through my closet. I'm wearing everything to try to determine what I'm keeping and what I'm not keeping. I'm probably not keeping this because I have 2 or 3 holes in it, and it's not going to get better. Thank you, Cheryl. So here's the thing. Even though I know I was criticizing somebody yesterday for having a makeover and new hairdo and saying they look like a cross between various things, we really shouldn't judge people by how they look. It's just petty and stupid. And it doesn't mean anything. It certainly does not mean anything about the person at all. And here's the last thing I just want to show you. You know, I'm on my book brigade. I'm going through the small part of our library that actually arrived here. And I got some books that I haven't read in forever I'm going to reread, like The Wind Done Gone, which is like a takeoff of Gone with the Wind. I was so happy to see this the other day, and I am reading this right now, and I'm probably going to read it every day. Streams in the Desert. It's a book written in the 1920s by Mrs. L.B. Cowman, who was the wife of a missionary who her husband went through a long time of illness before he died. This is a devotional that she wrote during that time frame. She wrote when she was taking care of him through his illness. And I've been so blessed by this. I don't care if you believe or you don't believe. There are some things in here that anybody can pull some value from. Somebody called it fresh water from a time-tested fountainhood of faith. And that's what I wanted to say about faith. The Vaughn Ohlmans and even the Jim Bakkers of this world, they take faith in the weirdest directions. I'm beginning to think that we need just basics. Don't judge others for looking different, that tell you to love others, that tell you to look within yourselves. Last night's was something that I needed to hear. It was about taking time to recharge yourself in solitude. Because for me, that's an important thing. I don't know about the rest of you, but I need my solitude resting times, particularly when I have a day like today where I'm kind of wheezy and the blood oxygen levels are low. So that's what I want to encourage you today. Find what blesses you, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be a Christian book. Find what blesses you. Ignore the critics, even the Duggar supporter critics. And speaking of which, I'll have to put a link in the description below because I used to routinely poke at them and put all their comments in Jerks for Jesus when I had NLQ. I may start doing that again. If they're going to come on here and they're going to spam me endlessly on Twitter, their anger over various things, I am probably going to put them there and send them up again because they're pretty much ridiculous. That's something to learn and gather something. I'm an atheist and I love reading people's stories, inspirational and courage grateful. Yes, same here. And I like to read everybody's stories. I was thinking the other day that I really need a box of guideposts, not guideposts after the guy took over and he put ads in there, but the old guideposts where people would put stories of all kinds of stuff and they weren't always Christian. I really appreciated that. I have a number of Muslim friends too, and That's one thing I'm finding is there's something to be said from all traditions. There's timeless wisdom to be imparted. There just is. I laughed this morning. I saw a picture of a young girl on horseback. She was 5, I think it was, and she was shooting an arrow. She was Mongolian, and she was learning how to hunt from the back of a horse. And I just thought, you go. That is the coolest thing I've seen in a long time. And I think we kind of have to be that way. We kind of have to be out of the box and do those crazy things that appeal to us just to recharge our own batteries and be who we are. So that is my wisdom for today. I'm going to go. I'm going to be meditating and laying in the bed and doing a whole lot of crochet. Yeah, Cheryl, I like it too. So you guys have a wonderful Sunday. Get some rest if you need it. If not, go out and do the thing that speaks to your heart.